Rinat Israel in Teaneck, New Jersey. I want to welcome everyone. I'm just going to give a very short preamble. Happy Mother's Day to everyone who is joining, for whom that is relevant. For people, and if you have friends who wanted to join but couldn't because of Mother's Day festivities, this will be recorded and is being recorded and will be on www.rinat.org under recent webinars and shiurim on the right-hand side. So again, thanks again for joining, and happy Mother's Day if applicable. We have a program tonight, I just want to mention it, Rinat, with Rabbi Dr. Ari Bergman, who many of you have heard, who's a fantastic speaker. The program is in person and on Zoom, and he's talking about Shemitah here and now, making Shemitah relevant. He has a Shemitah initiative that enables people, it's a group initiative that you probably have read about, that enables people to, farmers in Israel, to farm and sell their produce halachically, but not without using the heter mechira, which, as we learned in yesterday's shir between Mincha and Marav, is at Rinat is controversial, which, if you didn't know, the heter mechira is controversial. So we have a lot more programming coming up. If you want to be kept abreast, feel free to contact us at adulted@rinat.org, and we'll let you know. Then that keeps it, put you on a WhatsApp group that will keep you posted about all adult ed programming, which is coming thick and fast, but no advertising at all, nothing, no extraneous material in that WhatsApp group. So many people find it very helpful. So today, as you know, we have the last of a 4-part series. I have to say, I feel a little sad as I say that, because the entire series has been so enjoyable and popular. And Shuli Mishkin, as you know, will be speaking on underground Jerusalem, Yerushalayim Shalmata, which I hope people realize is a pun, but if not, I think we're going to hear more about that. We're going to have Yehuda Cohen from Beit El Ezrachi, which is the cause supported by the fundraising related to this whole program, which culminated in this past Shabbat Chayil. Will be speaking. I'm going to turn the floor over to Yehuda, but I'm also going to put the link in. It is not by any means too late to donate. So I'm going to put the link in the chat to everyone, as this is, I'm going to do it several times, at the beginning of the program. So in a moment, it's going to take me a second to get it together, and then afterwards. So Yehuda, thank you very much. Floor is yours.
Shalom, shalom from Netanya, Israel. Thank you so much for having me. And it's really so special to speak about lone soldiers in my home in Mother Days, because it's really, really very, very special. So Beit El Ezrachi, it's a children's home for children at risk. I know that most of you know about our home. And Reba, thank you so much for introducing us and bringing us into the community. Our children's home, it's a home for more than 200 children from the age of 4 to the age of 18. But no, in the age of 18, they only graduate in high school. But home is home forever. And our soldiers automatically become lone soldiers because they are here by us, because the parents don't have the capability to raise them. So they continue to be in our home. What you see behind me, it's really the children that will come to the home, to the soldiers' home next year. A child who comes to Beit El Ezrachi is a child who cannot be at home and needs to come to Beit El Ezrachi. So we are there with them in Kita Aleph, we are there with them in daycare center, in kindergarten. We are there to do their birthday, we tuck them into bed, we wake them up in the morning. We are there to do their bar and bat mitzvah that will be soon. We have 13 children bar and bat mitzvah, and then we take them to the best high school. But then comes the time of the army. the age of 18. Actually, the state of Israel is saying, all right, we are with you in a children's home until the age of 18. But in the age of 18, what? Do you think that in the age of 18, a child can be by himself in the world? No way. Our children, as I know, and I have 5, Baruch Hashem, 5 married, my own children, my private children, are in the age of 18 starting again babyhood, which means they again starting their childhood. A child in Bet El-Azraqi in the age of 18 is our child exactly like in first grade. But yes, no one is with him, not the government, no one else. But we are with him. He's a lone soldier according to the army, according to the legal authorities here in Israel, but he have a home. He left Bet El-Azraqi, the main building, and he comes into this building. Today we have 34 soldiers and 3 Sherut Leumi girls. So we have 1 building for the boys and 1 building for the girls, but they have a home. We have a soldier who just came home now, but most of the soldiers are coming for the weekend. So they are coming Thursday, but Sunday morning, they are going back to the army. But they have a home, and we have to make sure that they will have whatever other soldier have. So what does it mean, a home? A home, it means that the fridge will be full and they will have food. A home means that they will have a Shabbos in the place, and a home means that when they are going to the army on Saturday night, they will have some pocket money, because if they are going out for a date, they will have also with what to go out. So we are there with them. And we are there with them also in university, and when she meets a boy or he meets a girl, we are still with them. And we walk them down the aisle. We have 87 married children, 197 grandchildren. Everyone is asking until when Bet El-Azraqi will be there. And I'm asking you, until when you will be with your children. Parenting is about being there for the children. We are there for our children, and you, with your decision to support our soldiers, you decided to do parenting with us to be there for them. So this is my opportunity really to thank you for being there for my children. I have the honor to be the director of Bet El-Azraqi for the past 33 years. So we had with us already hundreds of lone soldiers, but one thing I can promise you, their children won't be lone soldiers because of all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What an inspiring pitch. And again, the link is, and the story, the link is, again, in the chat. I was remiss as I got a little messed up with the Zoom and with the setup. I just was remiss in not thanking the Tokayer family, who have sponsored this entire initiative and fundraising in memory of their beloved son, Ilan, whom so many of us remember so well and miss. And Rabbi, for those of you in Rinat yesterday, I don't think there was a person who was not moved to tears by Rabbi Wiener's beautiful speech about the Chayalim in our community, the many Chayalim in our community, and about Ilan's wonderful personality and his beautiful legacy. So again, thank you to the Tokayers, thank you to Bet El-Azraqi, and thank you now, Shuli.
Okay. Thank you, Faye. And also, I also want to thank the Tokayers. It's been a beautiful opportunity, and it's really an honor to be able to take part in this initiative. And Beit El-Azraqi is an incredible, awesome place. So thank you for letting me be part of this whole story. So what we are going to do today is we are going to do something that is connected to war. We've been talking about, throughout this series, history of the State of Israel, and a lot of it, unfortunately, has been connected to the wars that we've been needed to fight. However, this is a little bit of a different story. It's something that was precipitated by a war, but the discoveries are so much more significant than that. And it's a good way to, I think, to finish up our series, because it takes us into a world that's not only about conflict, but is also about what is the legacy that past generations have left for us, and what can we continue to give on to the future. So as Faye mentioned, Underground Jerusalem, Yerushalayim Shalmata is really a better title. Although Underground Jerusalem, Captain Charles Warren in the 19th century, when he came here, he wrote a book called Underground Jerusalem. But of course, Chazal talk about Yerushalayim Shalmala, right? Heavenly Jerusalem. And for those of us who are privileged to live here, sometimes we drive into the city and we are, in our minds, we're in Yerushalayim Shalmala, but very soon we hit the traffic and the craziness and the garbage, and we say, oh, we're really in Yerushalayim Shalmata. We're really in Jerusalem, the earthly Jerusalem. But this is going a little bit deeper and going underground, the earthly Jerusalem. So I'll just start by saying that the Six-Day War, which we commemorate with Jerusalem Day, which comes kind of at the end of this crazy, jam-packed, full month of Iyar. The Six-Day War had, of course, many, many miracles connected to it. Chief among them, of course, being the survival of this very new experiment called the State of Israel, which was only 19 years old, and it wasn't at all clear that that we were going to survive this this crazy experiment. So that, of course, was the greatest miracle, and what we would call the Nes Nigleh, right? The one that we could see the most obviously. We have the other miracles of being able to return to so many places that have been closed off from us, whether it is Judea and Samaria, Yudan and Shomron, or the Golan, Gaza, Sinai, right? These are the large miracles, the very obvious miracles, but there's also a smaller miracle, and that's the miracle that we're going to discuss here, and that's the miracle of rediscovering ancient sites. Okay, not only in Jerusalem, we're going to talk about Jerusalem, but of course, we also had archaeological surveys taking place in the Golan, right, where the site of Gamla, incredibly important battle in Second Temple in the Great Revolt, takes place, and discovering the biblical heartland sites like Shiloh and Gush Etzion, right, coming back to these places, and Hebron and Marat HaMachpelah. So this was made possible by the Six-Day War because we came back to these areas. But in some ways, the story of underground Jerusalem is made possible not only by the Six-Day War, but also by the War of Independence, by the War of 1948. So let's begin and let's explore that. The beautiful picture that you're seeing here is a wall painted with this beautiful fresco, this gorgeous paint that was mixed with plaster, colors mixed with plaster. It was a technique that was used in Second Temple times, and this is from one of the houses of the priests from Second Temple times, something that we're going to discover as we go along. So first of all, where are we going, right? Always good to know where we are going. We are going to be spending our time in the Jewish quarter. Okay, these are not the only places where excavations were done post Six-Day War. Of course, we have the whole story of the Southern Wall excavations, all the excavations near the Western Wall, what's happening today underneath the Western Wall Plaza area, right? This is fascinating stuff, but we are going to be focusing on what's happening in the Jewish quarter, right? So we are going to be visiting. Where are we going to be visiting? We are going to be, and that's why you have this handy dandy little key here, right? We're going to be at the Broad Wall. We're going to be at the Burnt House, okay? We are going to be in the Cardo over here, okay? The Chorvo we're going to talk about a little bit, and around, right, the Wool Archaeological Museum, otherwise known as the museum underneath Yeshivat HaKotel, right? So really the center of the Jewish quarter, that's where we are going to be spending our time. not a very large area, right? The Jewish quarter, this is giving you, if you look on the bottom here, you have the Jewish quarter as part of the larger Old City, right? The southeastern quarter, not a quarter, right, in terms of fractions, but a section of the Old City, actually the smallest one, because it doesn't really include this whole area of the Western Wall Plaza. It's just this little bit here. But it's packed with so much fascinating archaeology. Okay, so that's where we're going to be visiting. That's where we're going to be going today. But what's interesting to note is that if you look at this photograph, it's an amazing photograph. I hope people recognize some of the things here. I'll just try to kind of orient you a little bit. Right here, obviously, is the Dome of the Rock. Okay. Here is the Horva Synagogue, okay? This is the Tiferet Yisrael Synagogue, which is only now going up and being completed in the Jewish quarter. Why are you not seeing the Kotel Plaza? Why are you not seeing the Southern Wall excavations over here? Because it was all built up. There was nothing to see, right? It hadn't been created yet. This is a photograph from before 1948. That's why the Horva is still standing. That's why the Tiferet Yisrael is still standing, right? So this whole area here is this incredibly densely built up area of the Jewish quarter, okay, with some really impressive, spectacular, beautiful buildings like the Tiferet Yisrael, like the Horva, like the 4 Sephardic synagogues, which were beautiful, but were not kind of out there on the skyline because they were more underground, okay, but a lot of kind of slummy buildings, right? The where people lived in the Jewish quarter was not particularly beautiful, or nothing like it is today. Much more like the other quarters, right? When you walk through the Christian quarter or the Muslim quarter and you see everything packed together and very old, that's really what a lot of the houses look like here. But what's important for us to understand is the density, right? Look how packed in together it is. Now, people knew that there's something underneath here, right? There had to be. The Old City is very old. There's a lot to discover. How old, they did not know yet. That we're going to see is one of the elements that's going to be found out. But definitely there was plenty here from before the 20th century, the 19th century. The problem is you can't excavate in a dense urban area. And that's why the Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Armenian quarter have never really been properly excavated. They've been, you find things here and there as you have to fix some plumbing or make a new road, but you can't do a full large scale excavation. Of course, that couldn't have been done in the Jewish quarter either, okay? So there's a desire to discover something, but there's no way to get to it until 1948. And then what happens is that we have the Jordanians who come along and give us, I hesitate to use this word, but unintended consequences is a better way than saying this, but some people will say they gave us a gift, right? It was a gift that had very, very terrible repercussions, but what they did was when the Arabs come, right, you have to remember that the Old City is in 1948 is a siege within a siege. Okay, you have the siege around Jerusalem, difficulties in getting water and getting food and getting ammunition. We have the whole story of the convoys to Jerusalem, something we discussed when we did the War of Independence virtual tour. But the Old City is even worse because the Old City is essentially surrounded by Arab areas. So even when supplies got into Jerusalem, even harder to get them to the Old City. The Jewish population of the Old City by 1947, 1948 is rather small, right? Only 2% of the population lives in the Jewish quarter. Okay? By this point, the new neighborhoods outside the Old City are much more developed. Out of the 100,000 Jews in Jerusalem in 1948, only 2,000 live in the Jewish quarter, live in the Old City. The Muslim quarter Jews already by 1929 are pretty much gone because of the rioting. And who's living there? Mostly older people, families, religious people, not necessarily from the young fighters, right? And the Old City, the Jewish quarter, is besieged for an entire full 6 months, okay? Longer than any place else, from the beginning of the war at the end of November, the day after partition, November 29th is partition. November 30th, 1947, the War of Independence begins. Already at that point, the Jewish quarter is being attacked, and it continues a full 6 months until the Jewish quarter has to surrender to the Jordanians, May 28th, 1948. Okay, as part of this surrender, where the Jews thankfully are spared. Okay, the men are taken prisoner, they are brought to Jordan, but most of them survive and return within the year. The women, the children, the old people are sent to the new city. It's very devastating, but thank God it's not an ending like Gush Etzion 2 weeks earlier, where the residents were massacred. But what the Jordanians do in order to show that they are, here we are, we have sovereignty over the old city, don't think you can come back, they very spectacularly destroy the impressive large buildings of the quarter. What you're looking at here is the ruins of the Churva synagogue, right? Churva, which literally means destruction, because it was destroyed in the 18th century, but then it was destroyed again in 1948. They blow up the Churva, they blow up the Tiferet Israel, they desecrate the Sephardic synagogues and the Chabad synagogue and so many other places, and they don't really build very much. All right, actually, let's go back to this for 1 minute. They don't really build very much. So anything that's really worth saving above ground in the old city is pretty much destroyed by the Jordanians. 19 years later, with the triumphant return of Israel to the old city, to Jerusalem, right, to unite all of Jerusalem, the authorities, right, who's the new mayor, right, very new mayor, Teddy Kollek, he's only been mayor for about 1.5 years, and there's a newly formed corporation called the Jewish Quarter Development Corporation, which still exists today, and they look around at the quarter and they say, okay, what now, right? What are we going to do? What do we want to do with this place, which is in many ways a blank slate, right? Because anything worth saving has been destroyed, and all those slum buildings, not really worth saving. There's not so much history there. These are buildings from the late 19th, early 20th century, and they're not worth saving. Some of them were saved, by the way, if anyone's ever been to the old Yishuv Court Museum, right? That's one of the original chushot, one of the original courtyards from late 19th, early 20th century. A part of it was owned by the Orenstein family, the chief rabbi of the old city. So that's an interesting, historical piece that was preserved, but mostly it wasn't. And the question was, what are we going to do now? And there were all kinds of suggestions, right? Some suggested that this should become the religious center of Jerusalem, that there should be an enormous major central synagogue built here with thousands of seats, and that the rabbinate should have its headquarters here. And other people said, no, let's restore these synagogues and it'll be like a synagogue route, right? All these different interesting suggestions. But as the rubble is being cleared away, there's more and more of a realization that there might be something worth discovering under here. And maybe before we do anything, or what's really going to happen while we do anything, is let's excavate. Let's see what's underneath, because we suddenly have this once in a millennium opportunity to explore what's underground, because there's nothing in our way. We don't have to destroy people's houses. Now, who's going to do this job? This is a very big job. And the decision is made. The person who's approached is Nachman Avigad. And Nachman Avigad, as you can see from his dates, he's one of the veteran archaeologists of Israel. By 1967, he was involved in some of the earliest excavations, like in Beit Sha'arim with his contemporary Binyamin Mazar, who later goes on to excavate by the southern wall. He was an archaeologist who had trained in Europe, then came to the land of Israel. And by 1967, he's getting close to retirement age. And then he's approached with this offer. Do you want to excavate the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem? And now he knows it's going to be spectacular. He knows there's going to be something amazing that's going to happen, right? And this is this great quote from him. It seemed the old city would never reveal its secrets, and only an extraordinary event would create a situation where it would be possible to do serious excavations in Jerusalem. And of course, that extraordinary event was the Six-Day War. He wrote a book. He wrote a number of books, but he wrote a book kind of for the layman about these excavations. And in it, he writes that even though he knew that there would be extraordinary things to discover, he was hesitant, right? Because he knew this was going to be a very, very complicated undertaking. the Jewish Quarter Development Company wanted not only to excavate, but to build at the same time. They did not want, and still do not want, the Jewish Quarter to be a museum. Right? There's amazing stuff to discover here. We want this to be a living quarter where people are going to be here. They're going to have homes and children and grocery stores and synagogues, and there's going to be schools and prayer and all the things that you need for a really living place. So while we're excavating, we're also going to be putting in infrastructure and building. And if you've ever walked around the Jewish Quarter, you know that pretty much everything you see above ground, not everything, but most things are from the early 70s and on, whereas underground you have things that go back hundreds and even thousands of years. Now, Avigaad knew that excavation and construction really do not go together, right? They are diametrically opposed. So he was nervous about this whole, how is this going to work and what's going to be, and should he take on this project? And he's reassured, don't worry, you'll dig for a year, 2 years, you'll retire, you'll write a book, it'll be great. He, of course, agrees to take on the project. He begins in 1968 and they dig 1969 and they dig until 1982. Okay. And they don't dig like most archaeological excavations. If anybody here has ever been on an archaeological excavation, you know that they dig for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, right? And then you go back and you look at your finds and you write up your findings, etc. They didn't do that. They didn't have that luxury. Okay. They dug 8 months a year for 10 years, which is essentially equivalent to over 40 seasons of digging. They dug, rain or shine, you had to keep on going because buildings are going up, pavements are being paved, right? And you don't want to miss this incredible opportunity. And even with that said, by the way, there's a lot that still has not been uncovered. And we find new things all the time. So before we get to what he found, let's get a little bit of a sense of a timeline. Okay, what periods are we talking about and what was found in those periods? So as we're going to see, one of the very exciting things that Avigaad discovered is that the Jewish Quarter actually goes back to First Temple times. Okay, it's 2,700 years old, which no one knew until these excavations happened. So our first period is late First Temple period, the time of King Hezekiah, 700-ish, until the destruction of the First Temple in 586. Okay, that's our first period, First Temple, discovering that the city expanded to this point, right, already in First Temple times. We have basically nothing in early Second Temple times, right? The Persian period, Shivat Zion, up until the time of the story of Hanukkah. This is outside the city, but by the time we get to the Hashmonaim, the story of Hanukkah, around 200 BCE until the end of Second Temple times, this becomes a very important part of the city. And in fact, we're going to see that some of the most impressive, I won't say the most important, but some of the most impressive discoveries are from this late Second Temple period time, right? These last 3 centuries of the Second Temple time, where this becomes what's known as the Upper City, right? The Upper City, the home of the very wealthy Kohanim. Okay? In the Roman period, in the Byzantine period, no Jews in Jerusalem, or virtually no Jews in Jerusalem, but that doesn't mean that Jerusalem is not important. This area is not important. The Jewish Quarter is a Jewish area whenever Jews live in the city, okay? But when Jews are not living in the city, for example, after the Bar Kokhba period until the Muslim conquest, this is still an important place. And from this period, we have the story of the Cardo, okay? An enormous church called the Nea Church. Okay, when the Arabs allowed Jews back into the city, we have the Karaites coming to Jerusalem. Not all Jews live in the Jewish Quarter at that point. There are Jews living down by the southern wall, later living in the northern part of the city, but there are Karaites who are already in this area. Crusaders, the Jews are kicked out again, but again, this still remains a vibrant, important place, just not with Jews. Okay, we have a Crusader marketplace, we have churches. When the Mamluks, the Muslims who come and kick out the Crusaders, they allow the Jews back in. We have the story of Nachmanides, who comes and revives the Jewish Quarter, his synagogue, eventually the 4 Sephardic synagogues. Later on, the Ottoman period, and we're going to talk less about this because this is not really archaeology, but still important. Chorva de Tiferet Israel, and by the late 19th, early 20th century, Jews start to leave the old city. There's not enough room. It's crowded, it's dirty, it's not a great place to live, and that's where we have the movement outside the walls, okay? And as we said before, 1948, the Jews are exiled, the Jewish quarter is conquered, and 1967, we return, okay? So that's just to give us a larger picture of the time periods that we're talking about, okay? So let's see what was what. There were many questions that Avigad and his fellow excavators set out to answer in this excavation, okay? There were many things they wanted to answer. One of the most significant questions that they wanted to answer was, at what point does the city grow to this, what we call the Western Hill? So let's understand that by looking a little at the map here, okay? So already by the late 19th century, everybody understood that Jerusalem begins down here in what we call the city of David, outside of the walls of today, right? Here are the walls of today, right? Jerusalem begins down the city of David. Why does it begin there? Because this is where the water is. This is where the Gihon spring is, okay? So this begins in Canaanite times, give or take 5,000 years ago. This is the city. David conquers the city. He expands it to include something called the Ophel, okay, a little higher up. And King Solomon expands it even more and builds the temple. Okay, very nice. However, we have a very big question, which is, at what point does the city grow to encompass what we'll call the Western Hill, right? The Jewish quarter all the way up to Jaffa Gate and coming back down and around, okay? And we had two groups of people. One were called the minimalists because they advocated the smaller point of view, and one were called the maximalists, right? Obvious reasons. The minimalists said, no, no, no. Throughout First Temple times, this was the city, right? Let's clear all this because now it's confusing. Throughout First Temple times, this was the whole city, and nothing expanded until much, much later, till the Hasmoneans come along, and then the city grows. That was the minimalist position. Maximalist position said, no, no, no. At a certain point during First Temple times, during biblical times, the city grows. Now, as you can imagine, each of these sides argued their cases very persuasively, but nobody had any proof because nobody had actually excavated up here on the Western Hill. So there was no reason to support either of these positions, right? So one of the things that Avigad really wanted to find out was, okay, who's right, right? Who is right? What do we know about this area? So there had been many finds that they came across as they were uncovering things in the beginnings of these excavations. They found pottery, they found idols, they found special handles called lamelech handles, which are a tax handle from the time of King Hezekiah, which was nice, which started to show that there was settlement on this Western Hill already in First Temple times, because all of these finds went back to late First Temple times, but it wasn't enough, right? Because it could have been that people lived down in the city of David and they took a picnic up to the Western Hill. It's not a proof that the city expanded. It's proof that people moved back and forth, that they felt comfortable going up to this hill and bringing stuff with them. But in order to know if the city itself really expanded, you needed a structure. You needed a building. And that's when Avigad discovers this structure, which I'm sure many people here who've walked through the old city are familiar with. This is called the Broad Wall, right? HaChoma HaRechava. It's actually a name that comes from the book of Nehemiah from Second Temple times, but it was ascribed to this wall. And as you can see, it is indeed rather broad, right? It's nice, few meters, quite a few meters across, right? And we think that it is about 8 meters high, right? And this is a wall that is not the wall of the house. It's too big to be the wall of the house. And its location also seems to indicate that it is not the wall of the house, but rather the wall of the city, right? Smack in the middle of the Jewish quarter. And this already is enough of a proof to say that people moved. Actually, let's go back. In fact, let's go back to here for 1 minute. Okay, where's this wall? This is only a small piece of a wall, but it's still enough of a piece of a wall, right, that it helps us to see where did the wall go, right? The wall went This is the broad wall basically over here, right? And the wall seems to have continued. Okay, we're going to talk at the end about how many other pieces of this wall we have discovered. Okay, it's a small piece, but it's impressive. But what's interesting about it is if you look at it and its construction, this is, for a lot of reasons, a first temple period wall. Okay, those of us who are familiar with a little archaeology, we're going to see it in a few minutes. Archaeology, walls, buildings, structures from Second Temple times, certainly from the end of Second Temple times, from Herodian times, even from Hasmonean times, the stones are much bigger. They are much more finely chiseled. These are mostly what's called field stones, right? Stones that are just kind of gathered up. They're not, nobody did anything special to them. The mortar matches with mortar we know from First Temple times. The pottery that was found here matches with what we know from First Temple times. Who's building a wall like this? So of the possible candidates that could be in First Temple times, the most likely one is King Hezekiah. Okay, King Hezekiah, who is living in the time of the Assyrian conquest of northern Israel, right? The exile of the 10 tribes. Then he comes down to Judea, right? This is when we have the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah. He comes down to Judea and he basically exacts tribute from the king, from King Hezekiah. But at a certain point, King Hezekiah decides to rebel against the Assyrian king. And in doing so, right, he's putting his trust in God, of course, but he is also doing other things to prepare for this battle, including diverting the water, right? We have the whole story of Hezekiah's tunnel and building or rebuilding the city wall. And we have reference to this in the book of Isaiah, right? It says that you counted the houses of Jerusalem and pulled houses down to fortify the wall. One of the fascinating things that we discovered when we excavated this wall, you can see it here too, right? I'll show you in the big picture where this is the remains of a house, okay, that are right outside the city walls, right? This is inside the city. This is outside the city. There's the remains of a house that's right outside the city walls. What is Isaiah talking about? He's talking about the king's officials coming and saying to somebody, hello, the king will be coming next week to knock down your house and rebuild the wall. You have this week to get your stuff together and get out. Okay, today we call this eminent domain. The government is allowed to tell you, move because we're building a highway through your house. Okay, you should get some compensation, but you have to move. And this is exactly what Isaiah is talking about. Hezekiah comes along, he kicks out the residents of these houses, but the house is still here, right? The house is still here and we can still see it. Why is he building this wall? He's building this wall for two reasons. Number one, what we said, he has to fortify the city against the Assyrians. But number two, because the city has grown bigger. The city has expanded. Why is it expanded? Because you have, well, first of all, King Hezekiah is a good king. The city flourishes in his time. We know this from Tanakh. He takes care of his subjects. He makes sure people are fed, but also because in this time, the kingdom of Israel is conquered. And anybody who's able to escape, any refugees who are able to get out, where are they going to go? They're going to go to Jerusalem if they can. And the city grows. And we know in this time, we hear about it in various prophecies, right? There are new neighborhoods, the Machtesh, the Mishneh, and Hezekiah has to build a wall that's going to encompass these new neighborhoods, not just the area down at the bottom. So Avigad was very, very excited by this discovery. He really felt that this discovery was the most important discovery of all the phenomenal things that he found. This is the one that really changed history because it told us that Hezekiah's city was already up here on the Western Hill. And that's a very important thing, which we have proven again and again by finding more pieces of this wall. This is not something that was discovered in the excavations, but it's an important part of the story. So what happens when the Assyrians show up, right? The Assyrians show up, Hezekiah has diverted the water. He's changed the wall, right? The Assyrians come, we have, this is a very, very powerful story in Tanakh. It's such an important story that we hear it at least 3 times. It's in Divrei Yamim, it's in Melachim, it's in Yeshayahu, it's also mentioned a little bit in Amos. Sancheriv, the king of Assyria, comes his soldiers speak to the people who are guarding on the wall. They threaten them. The people are completely freaking out. Hezekiah is completely freaking out. They go to Isaiah the prophet, and he says, don't worry. God's not going to allow Sancheriv to conquer the city, right? He's going to defend the city. And indeed, what happens the very next day is that the Assyrian soldiers drop dead, right? Whether of a plague or something else, and the city is not conquered. Now, in case you are tempted to say, okay, that's the Tanakh's version of events, but what really happened, right? We have two other proofs that the Assyrians don't conquer the city. Number one, there is no destruction layer from this time period, from 701. If a city is conquered, there's almost always a layer of destruction. The houses are destroyed. There's a huge fire. We don't have that from Jerusalem. We do have it a little more than 100 years later when the Babylonians conquered the city. So that's number one. We have no destruction layer. Number two, we have this amazing prism. Okay, this is one of the ways that kings would record all of their great victories, because kings only record victories, they don't record defeats. So this is one of the ways the Assyrian kings would record victories, was on what's called a prism, right? It's a piece of stone with very, very tiny cuneiform writing, and Sancheriv, like the other kings, wanted to write, I conquered this one and this one and this one and this one. And when he gets to Hezekiah, king of Judah, he doesn't say I conquered Jerusalem. He doesn't say I destroyed Jerusalem. Hezekiah, king of Judah, I shut him up like a bird in a cage, right? Which tells us the siege was great. Don't ask me about the conquest. There wasn't any. Okay. Another piece from First Temple Times, another important part of the story of First Temple Times, one that's less noticeable to visitors today, because today it's underneath an apartment building. Because remember, one of the big things that happened in this excavation, there had to be a decision of what to preserve, what everything had to be preserved, but what to show, what to cover up, right? What's going to be part of the landscape of the Jewish quarter, what's going to go underneath the ground. So this is one of the things that ended up underneath the ground, the Israelite Tower, the Migdal HaYisraeli. It's underneath an apartment building. You can see it. Obviously, it wasn't destroyed, but you have to get the keys. It's a whole big story, right? But what this is it's part of a system of guard towers, of a gate system in the northern part of the city. The northern part of the city, very vulnerable part of the city. Mitzafon tipatach hara'ah. Evil is going to come in from the north. And so there was an additional fortification besides just the broad wall, but a guard posts, 4 towers at a gate in the northern part of the city. It's really not very far from the broad wall. It's very close by. Right? It was such a good place to build a guard post that the Hasmoneans built their own, right, adjacent to the biblical one. And when you go down there, you can actually see both. You can see the piece of the tower from First Temple times, and you can see the piece of the tower from Hasmonean times. But what's even more powerful is that you can see the destruction. Okay, you can see arrowheads, you can see ashes, you can see what happened when the Babylonians come after the Assyrians, and they do indeed succeed in destroying the city, in breaking through the towers, breaking through all the various defenses, and conquering the city. Okay, so from First Temple times, we're going to jump forward to the time period which has probably, I think definitely, the most impressive and the most excavations, the most finds. Okay, and this is the time period of late Second Temple times. Okay, the Hasmoneans are the first to come back in Second Temple times to expand the city essentially to the boundaries of where Hezekiah's city was. They built some stuff, they built walls. We do have some remains from Hasmonean times, but the real amazing building, the incredible building, is from what we call the Herodian period, named, of course, after King Herod, right, who rules in the last part of the 1st century before the Common Era. And he lends his name to this whole 100 years from about 40 before the Common Era to 70 of the Common Era, when the city is destroyed. And this is a time when the city is at its greatest, at its largest that it's going to be until the late 19th century. All right, really unbelievable. The city expands. Not only does the city expand, It is a very wealthy city. It has the temple that Herod renovates and makes into this incredible structure that the rabbis in the Talmud, who have no great love for Herod, but they say if you haven't seen Herod's temple, you've never seen a beautiful building. And we have this whole class of very wealthy Kohanim, very wealthy priests. How they get so wealthy, we'll talk about that in a minute. Right? Not always in the cleanest of ways. And these very, very wealthy priests are building themselves in incredible mansions in the city of Jerusalem, in this what we call the upper city. Okay, and they are living the high life, but living a very priestly life, meaning very much concerned with purity, right? Not so much concerned with theft, but very concerned with purity. And Avigad excavated an amazing complex of 6 houses that are connected to each other. Right? This is underneath today's Yeshivat HaKotel. The excavations were done. The yeshiva was built on top. Today it's undergoing some renovations. Hopefully it will open up bigger and better than ever. But he discovered these 6 beautiful houses. And in fact, it's right off of a street that in the 19th century got the name Mizgav Ladach, after the hospital there. Mizgav Ladach means a support for the poor. Avigad's joke was that this street should have been called Mizgav Lagvir, right? A support for the super wealthy machers, right? Now these guys lived in an incredible way, very, very, very wealthy. And the story that we have here, of course, is a fascinating story because on the one hand, they are very, very, very careful about certain elements of halacha, of Jewish law. They are very not careful about other elements. If this sounds slightly familiar to certain other periods in Jewish history, it's not a coincidence. They're very careful about purity, as we're going to see in a minute. They are very careful about images. Okay? Judaism and images have a very complicated history. Obviously, we have the second commandment not to make images, but this was interpreted very differently in different time periods. And anybody who's been to the beautifully decorated synagogues from the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries in the Galil and has seen the zodiacs and the imagery of animals and even of people up there, knows that there were time periods where imagery was more or less accepted or accepted with certain boundaries. But late Second Temple times was very, very strict. No images whatsoever, no people, no animals. The only things you could have were geometric designs, floral designs, right? Things like that, but no faces, no people, no nothing. So they're very, very, very careful about that. They're very, very careful about purity. What are they not so careful about? Stealing from other people, right? And this is how they're able to build these incredible houses. Now, this is not true of all the Kohanim. Clearly, there were good Kohanim, but we know from Josephus, and we know from many places in the Gemara that there were families that lived the high life, and the money that they got came from the people that they took that money from. Anyone who's learning Daf Yomi, yesterday you learned about Yoshua ben Gamla and his wife, Marta bat Baitus, who was from one of these families. We're going to see a quote about them in a minute. And she essentially paid for him to become the high priest. And the opulence here is incredible. Just 2 other examples, right? We saw the beautiful mosaics and the, here, didn't even show you the triclinium, right? The beautiful dining room where people would recline on their couches and they would eat. They would have their own private mikvaot and bathhouses. Gorgeous courtyards with columns, right? All of these things were found in the excavations. One of the best examples of this is this floor, which you look at it, you say, that's a nice floor, right? But if you lived in this time, if there had been a Beautiful Homes and Gardens or some such periodical in the 1st century before the Common Era, this house would have made it in on the basis of this floor. Okay, this is a style of tiling that's called opus sectile. The only other places that we found it are in Herod's palaces and on the Temple Mount. Okay, so that's who these guys are styling themselves after. These are the people with the enormous plasma screen. These are the guys who have, the 4 deep refrigerators, anything you want, deep freezers, anything you want to talk about, these guys have it. Okay, the other thing that they are very, very, very careful about is purity, right? The Gemara Pesachim talks about Parza Tahara B'Yisrael. This is a time period where purity was everywhere. And if you've learned Mishnah, you've learned Gemara, you know that issues of purity and Trumot and Masrot, and are they becoming impure? Who's impure? Who's allowed to touch things? Who's a Chaver? Who's very careful about purity and about Truma, and who's not, right? Who's an Am Haaretz? These are very vital issues for this time period. And of course, Kohanim, even more than everyday people, are very concerned about purity. And so we have mikvaot, right? These are houses that have beautiful, opulent bathhouses in the basements of their houses, just like their Roman counterparts. But in addition to having bathhouses, they have mikvaot, so that you can be sure that you eat your kachim, you eat your pieces of sacrifice, you eat your trumot and masrot, B'tahara, in purity, so that you go to the mikvah before you eat anything. And each house has 2, 3, 4 mikvaot. The other thing that Avigad found in these houses, and we have since found them in many other Jewish homes from this time period, are stone vessels, right? Clay is the easiest way to make dishes. Glass is very high end and expensive and a status symbol, but stone is very special for Jews only, because stone does not become impure. Right? What does that mean? That means if grandma is in the kitchen and she drops dead, all of those clay vessels that are in the kitchen, because it's an ohel, because it's a covered space, those clay dishes have now become impure, and there's nothing to do about it. You've got to smash them. You've got to throw them away. Stone doesn't lose its purity. It's a biblical law. Stone doesn't lose its purity. And therefore, stone vessels, which are harder and much more expensive to make, are actually, in the long run, much more valuable, because they don't become impure and you can keep on using them. So we find stone dishes, and we find stone cups, and we find stone plates, and all kinds of incredible objects that are made out of stone. Part of this, by the way, is also the fact that Herod brings in all sorts of people and trains them as stone cutters to work in the temple. And when the temple is finished, none of these guys are going back home to the farm. They're staying in Jerusalem, and they need to use their skills to make a living. So there's a plethora of stonemasons and stone cutters. So that's part of the story. But let's get back to our wealth, right? This is a very obvious thing to the Gemara, that there was a corrupt class of priests, many of them Tzdukim, Sadducees, but not all of them, who make their living off of the temple and off of the corruption in the temple. Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta said, why was Shiloh destroyed? Because they treated holy offerings disgracefully. Why was the first building of Jerusalem destroyed? Because of idolatry, sexual immorality, and spilling of blood. But we know that in the second temple, they labored in Torah, okay? And they were careful with tithes. Let's read it in the Hebrew because it's so powerful. Ba'achrona mikirim anu bahem shehem amelim b'Torah v'zihirin b'ma'asrot mipnei magalu. Why were they exiled? Mipnei she'ohavim et hamamon in ish et re'ehu. They loved money and they hated each other. You can't say it more plain than that. And this is a very, very strong indictment. We hear it in the literature. We see it in the excavations. Just one other source that I didn't bring here, but we have a source that talks about the various families of the Kohanim, and it says oily, right? Woe to me from the Katros family and the Baitos family and the Ishmael ben Fiabi's family. Why? Because they tell on people to the Romans, because they beat people, because they extort money from people, and there is a lot of corruption, and that's where all this money is coming from. Okay? And Nachman Avigad really uncovered the archaeological equivalent of what the Gemara and Josephus are talking about. Okay, one other amazing thing that was discovered here, the menorah. Okay, not the menorah. It would be very amazing if they discovered the menorah. They didn't discover the menorah, but a depiction of the menorah, right? how is the menorah, what did the menorah of the Beit HaMikdash look like is a very interesting and controversial question, right? Stephen Fine wrote a whole book about it. We have a lot of depictions of the menorah. The menorah, of course, is the Jewish symbol, right? Much more so than a Magen David, which is a much, much later symbol. Menorah is depicted on so many different places, in oil lamps and on synagogues and even on bread stamps and all over. What did the menorah look like, right? So if you look at the symbol of the state of Israel, the menorah on the symbol of the state of Israel is fashioned after the menorah on the Arch of Titus, okay, which has this large graduated base with all kinds of images on it. And many people have argued that this could not possibly have been the menorah, or maybe Herod changes the menorah, right? Well, I'm not even going to get into this whole discussion. But one of the things that was discovered by Avigad, today it's displayed in the Herodian Quarter, but it actually was not discovered there. It was discovered like a block or so away in the ruins of a house in the center of the Jewish Quarter of today. They discovered an etching of the menorah, right? Half of the menorah, the other half is filled in, right? You can see the darker side over here is the original. And it's actually fascinating because it's the menorah and it's two other things, which we think are the shulchan, right? The table for the showbread, and the Mizbeach HaKtoret, the incense altar. These three things are what are displayed in the Kodesh, right? In the holy. Why is this on a wall? So I don't know if this is true, but I always think it's a great way to kind of bring this back down to earth. One day it's take your child to work day, and Mr. Cohen says, "Come on, honey, let's go, right? Let's go, little Pinchas, and I'm going to show you where Daddy works." And he takes him into the Kodesh, which of course Kohanim are allowed to go into. And Pinchas comes home and is so overwhelmed that he draws a picture, right? Now take a look at this menorah. Besides the fact that it has this great depiction of the Kaftor Vaperach, right? All the decorations on the menorah, but look at the base, right? The base is this triangular base, not what we have in the Arch of Titus, rather what the Rambam describes. Rambam never saw this picture, right? And that's an amazing thing. So did the menorah really look like this? Again, not a question that I'm going to get into, but a fascinating contribution to this whole question. Okay, one other piece from this time period. Just across the alleyway from the Herodian Quarter is another house that's really part of the same complex, but today it's just a different site. You have to pay a different admission fee, but it doesn't mean it wasn't part of the same neighborhood. And that's called the Burnt House. The Burnt House has become very famous because of its burntness. Okay, when Avigad uncovers it, he sees again one of these houses of the Kohanim, which has actually a workshop in the basement. We think this is the house of the family that made the Ketoret, that made the incense. But what really struck him when he uncovered it was that it was covered completely in a thick layer of ashes. There clearly had been a fire here. And Avigad is very overcome. And he actually writes in his book, and it's fascinating. He says, well, maybe my imagination is running away from me. Could this possibly be the fire that was part of the destruction of the city in the year 70? Or maybe I'm just imagining things. And he calls in various colleagues to come and see it because he doesn't trust himself. And everybody who comes says, yes, clearly this house, based on what's discovered here and the furniture and the pottery and everything we see here, this is from the very end of Second Temple times, and this is the ashes from the Churban, right? We know that, this is the source. I forgot that I put it in here. Right, come back to it in a minute. We know that the city was, this temple was destroyed in the month of Av. And according to Josephus, it took another month for the Romans to ascend to the upper city and to conquer it in the month of Elul. They are able to conquer the upper city and destroy it. And it seems that that's what this is. And this made waves throughout the world. There were headlines, papers all over the world. People were completely overwhelmed by this. We'll come back to that in a minute. But among the things that were discovered here was a stone weight, okay, that says on it, Dibar Katros, okay, of the house or the son of Katros. Okay? Now, fascinatingly enough, in the rebuilding of the Tiferet Yisrael synagogue across the way, a matching weight was discovered. Now, Katros is one of these families that we hear about in the Gemara and Pesachim that I mentioned to you before. Okay? Abba Shaul ben Botnit said in the name of Abba Yosef ben Chanin, woe is me due to the high priest of the house of Baitos, right? Marta, who we read about yesterday. Woe is me due to their clubs. Woe is me for the high priests of the house of Chanin. Woe is me for their whispers, right? They tell on people. Woe is me to the high priest of the house of Katros. Woe is me to their pens. They write all kinds of denunciations about people to the Romans to get them in trouble, hey, etc., etc. Their fathers were high priests. Their sons were temple treasurers. Their son-in-laws were temple overseers, and their servants strike the people with clubs. Okay? As the Gemara in Pesachim, talking about a culture of nepotism, of violence, of corruption. And here's the Katros family house. Right? Now, this house comes to a very terrible and violent end. It's clearly burnt down, but among the things that were discovered in the house, which Avigad again was very overcome by, was a spear, okay, as well as parts of a skeleton. Of an arm, and based on the bones, it seems of a young woman. And the assumption is that there was a great battle here, right? That the Romans came and the members of the house did not give up so easily, and there was a battle. And after that, the house was completely destroyed and was burnt down. And this was just a very, very powerful moment in these excavations, because here's something: the destruction of the temple, the destruction of the city, the corruption of the priests. This is something that Jews have been talking about and writing about for hundreds upon hundreds of years. We commemorate this every year on Tisha B'Av. We have an entire mourning period leading up to Tisha B'Av. We have a liturgy that talks about this. But here's the first physical evidence of the destruction. And this is an unbelievable thing. And Avigad was overcome by it, and the other archaeologists were overcome by it. And he writes about how people would come by the excavations. This was one of the earlier sites that was excavated. And people would come by and they would say, could we take home a little bit of ashes? Zecher lachurban. We want a piece of this physical memory, not just the emotional, the spiritual memory. We want a piece of the physical memory of the destruction of the temple. And it just was such a powerful moment in this whole story, an incredible, tragic, but incredibly powerful moment. Okay, from that very significant event of Second Temple times, right, and of the destruction of the temple, we move to a later time period, which is Roman and Byzantine times. Okay, the Romans come along, destroy the temple, put the Roman 10th Legion camp in Jerusalem. After the Bar Kokhba revolt 65 years later, they ban any Jews from coming into the city, as we're going to see. But meanwhile, the city begins to grow. And in Byzantine times, when the Roman Empire becomes Christian, it becomes even more important. Right? And you have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and you have all kinds of religious processions, and it becomes a place of pilgrimage. And it's a very important site. And that's the time period that we're talking about with the Cardo, right? With this very large main street, very broad, 22 meters broad, right? 66 feet, a very, very large downtown main street, okay? 5th, 6th century. Of all the places that Avigad excavated, this is the one that he knew he was going to find, okay? We'll talk about why in a second. This is a great painting that was put in the area of the Cardo, of the covered Cardo, I don't know, like 10 years ago. It's a great painting illuminating what it might have looked like 1,500 years ago, right? With the stores and the busy and everything going on here. But important to note that among all the different people who came to Jerusalem and visited and shopped and went to the churches, there are no Jews. There are no Jews because Jews are forbidden to enter the city from the end of the Bar Kokhba revolt, from the 130s of the Common Era until the Muslim conquest, okay, in the 630s, 500 years, okay, 500 years where Jews are forbidden to enter the city. This mosaic adds a few Jews. Okay, because why not, right? And it's a great detail. You can see it over here in the corner. Okay. To remember the three people who were most responsible for bringing this place to light. And of course, they did not appear in the original Cardo. Okay, and that's of course Teddy Kollek over here with the blue robe, mayor of Jerusalem, very legendary mayor of Jerusalem, mayor throughout this whole excavation. Nachman Avigad, he gets this nice royal red and gold, and Hillel Geva, right, another archaeologist in the back here. Hillel Geva of the three is still alive and still active, and he's a younger man here, but they get their due. Now, how did Avigad know that he was going to find the Cardo? Right? Because he had a snapshot of the old city from 1500 years ago. What does that mean? That means in a church in Jordan, in a place called Madaba or Medva, that was rediscovered at the end of the 19th century. This is a Byzantine church, right, that its decoration on its floor was a massive mosaic map of the land of Israel from the time when the church was built, right, in the 5th, 6th century. And the most significant part was Hagia Polis Jerusalema, the holy city of Jerusalem. Why would you have such a mosaic map on the floor of your church? Because people wanted to go on pilgrimage. People wanted to come to the land of Israel. They wanted to walk in the footsteps of the stories of Jesus. So either you'll plan your trip while you're looking at the floor, or you won't ever get to go, but at least you'll be able to see the sights, right? And it's an amazing resource because it shows us what things look like at that time. And of course, right down the center of this holy city of Jerusalem is a nice wide street with pillars on either side. And that, of course, is the Cardo, this major boulevard that begins at Damascus Gate, Shar Shem, or as it's known in Arabic, Bab el Amud, for the pillar, the Amud that's right here that had a bust of Hadrian on top. And it ends at the very large Nea Church here in the south, okay? And the Cardo right in the middle here. And Nachman Avigad knew that he was going to find this, and indeed he did. He excavated it and he found it. Now, as we said, this is a time period that is very against the Jews. Okay, we do not have Jews allowed in the city, and we have a very virulent and a nasty testimony from one of the church fathers, Jerome, right, who writes a commentary to the Bible, and he writes in his commentary on the book of Zephaniah, right? He's trying to connect the biblical story to contemporary events. And he says, until today, it has been forbidden for those poisonous hypocrites to enter Jerusalem because of their murder of the prophets, including the last one, the Son of God. They may come only to cry, because then they are permitted to mourn the ruins of the city in exchange for payment. Just as they once bought the blood of the Messiah, now they buy their own tears, and even mourning is not given them for free. On the day that the Romans conquered and destroyed Jerusalem, i.e. Tisha B'Av, you can see the members of this nation, women wearing rags and old men carrying a burden of rags and years, gathering to mourn, proving by their bodies and their clothes the meaning of the anger of the Lord. A collection of miserable rabble appears while the cross of the Lord shines and celebrates its resurrection, and on the Mount of Olives is raised a cross. Meanwhile, this pathetic nation cries over its destroyed temple, and they are not worthy of pity. So this is a very obnoxious but very important testimony that tells us that Jews were actually allowed into the city one day a year, okay, the 9th of Av, to cry over the temple. They had to pay for it, but they were allowed to come to the city. And this is the city that the Cardo is dwelling in, right? This very anti-Semitic city. Today, the Cardo is in the heart of the Jewish quarter. It's really been brought back to life with these beautiful, beautiful modern mosaics showing what shops at the time may have looked like. Okay, I don't know why I have that. Oh, I'm going backwards. Excuse me. No. I'm not going backwards. Okay. And the Cardo is very much an integral part of the Jewish quarter. Okay, a few last things because we really are nearing the end of our time. Okay. crusade, we have some stuff from later time periods. Not all of it is exposed. There is still more to discover. Okay? The emphasis in the Jewish Quarter today is really on the Cardo, the Broad Wall, and the Second Temple stuff, but we do have things from Crusader times. If you've ever walked down the steps that go from the Jewish Quarter down to the Kotel, you have walked by this garden, which is actually a church, right? It's a Crusader church. If you've ever walked through and went to get yourself a bagel or to go to the bathroom, right, in that area right before the steps, that's part of a Crusader marketplace. And the story of the excavation of the old city did not finish with Avigad's excavations. It really is still continuing today. Today, it's less initiated by the Antiquities Authority and the Development Company, but it does happen, whether it's because of renovations, storekeepers who want to add on something to their store, the city that needs to redo a road, or because, for example, the Tower of David over here on the right, when they wanted to turn the area of the Kishla into part of the museum, and they suddenly discovered the wall of the city from Hezekiah's time, right? These discoveries are continuing. So we do find more pieces of Hezekiah's wall, whether it's in the depths of the Tower of David or on the walls around the old city. Today, there's very exciting discoveries that have gone on underneath the Western Wall Plaza, and people who've been back to Israel more recently may have been rather surprised to notice that during Corona, a large building went up at the back of the Western Wall Plaza, and there are unbelievable excavations underneath there that are soon going to be opened up to the public. In the city of David, we are discovering the road, the Pilgrim's Road that led from the Shiloh pool up to the Temple Mount, and there's still more to be found in this continuing story. So thank you. I'm sorry I went a little over, but I stole back my time that was stolen from me. Just one question, and then if people have questions, was the base in the sketch similar to different to what's on the Arch of Titus? Very different, right? We saw it's triangular as opposed to this kind of a stepped base. Anyone else have questions, comments? Or Faye, if you have stuff you want to add.
I think Aaron took care, had a question, and then I'm going to read the question and then give him the mic. He wants to share a few words. The question was, and I'm reading this off, is there a moratorium on drawing images of the menorah temple items? If so, the picture on the wall would have to be inaccurate.
Okay, so very interesting question. The Gemara discusses making menorahs, or like anything that was in the temple, can you make something similar? So as of course in Judaism, this was interpreted differently in different time periods, right? One suggestion was, no, we're only talking about a 3D menorah. As long as it's not 3D, then it's okay. Others said, no. Even if it's drawn, it should be 5, it should be 3, it should be 9, right? Which is why in some synagogues today, by the way, a menorah is not a 7-branch menorah. It has other numbers. And other people said, no, it's fine. And there were definitely places that didn't really worry so much about what the rabbis had to say. So for example, in Ma'on in the South Hebron Hills, in their synagogue, they built a beautiful 3D 7-branch menorah that they put smack in the middle of their synagogue. So it's not necessarily, and realize of course that this is while the temple is standing, right? What the rabbis are talking about is after the destruction. So I think it's very likely, more than likely, definitely, that this was an eyewitness. Somebody saw this and drew it because it's right there. Okay, I see there's another question. Was the Israelite tower shown in the beginning of the tour available to be seen? It is, but you have to arrange it. You can't just do it. You have to arrange it in advance. It is, if you know, in the Jewish Quarter, like right past the Broad Wall, and there's a nice little museum of the first temple times. It's right across from there, literally in the basement of an apartment building. Okay, Faye, you had something you wanted to add, or Aaron wanted to add something?
Aaron, I think you may have to, Shuli, you may have to unmute Aaron.
I think you can unmute yourself, but I can. But yeah, no, he's unmuted.
Okay, terrific. Aaron, the floor is yours.
Aaron, aka Riva. We just a couple of shout outs, of course, to Faye for running with this series from the minute we mentioned the idea. She makes it happen each time, no matter what's happening in her life. And we at Renat, we're just so privileged to have you in charge of this adult education. And we personally have felt so lucky to have you as part of our team in this initiative. And we can't thank you enough. Shuli, especially during COVID, you allowed us to visit, to learn, to re-energize our connection. Some of us over Pesach were able to tour with you in person, and we hope this will be a continued partnership where we can learn and grow with you in connection to the history of Israel. We're always looking to add initiatives that make this project meaningful to all our members. So any ideas that people have, things they want to see more of, we look forward to being able to keep adding to this to make this time period most meaningful for everybody. And lastly, and most important, thank you to all the members who have participated in this. It's incredibly meaningful and powerful for us to have you join us, and then to be able to give tzedakah to something that we research personally, where we know it's really going to make a difference for soldiers. Usually it's smaller organizations that take that money and really put it directly into these lone soldiers in a way that really makes a difference for them. And we couldn't do that without you. And by doing these things in Ilan's memory, as hard as it is, it's also wonderful. And we encourage everybody to do what they can. We don't look at the numbers, we look at the people, and we hope that there could be a unity in the shul participating in this event in any way that's comfortable for them. So thank you again to everybody.
Thanks so much. And again, the link is, the link is there if you just scroll up, it's before a few questions. And so please, please donate. And thanks again to the Tokayers for this wonderful and meaningful program.
Thank you, everyone. Shavua Tov, and I hope we will meet again.
Thank you.
Faye, can you send out the link in an email?
It was sent out. It was sent, first of all, it's there if you roll up, but it was sent out, it was sent out last week. We'll try to send it out again, okay?
Thank you.
And if you just email me or adulted@renat.org, I'll send it to you, okay?
Okie doke.
All right, thanks.